Hello and welcome to another Web Developer Path video. Today we are going to learn about PHP Superglobals and form handling. So this is the second video of a three-part videos where in the first one we covered the basics, and I will put the link to that video in the description. So these are the notes from the first video which you can get in my GitHub. And in the first video we also set up XAMPP so we can run PHP on our local machine. So if you don't have XAMPP, make sure you download and install it for your machine, and after you installed it, you should have the XAMPP folder. So we are going to go to that folder and into the htdocs and create a new folder here. I'm going to call it PHP part 2, and I'm going to drag and drop it inside my VS Code so we can create our files here. If this is the first time you're using PHP in VS Code, make sure you add the PHP executable file to your VS Code settings. So if you go to the settings on your VS Code and just search for PHP and click on this PHP executable path and edit in JSON. So you can see I already have passed the directory to that PHP, and it goes inside the XAMPP folder inside the PHP. So if we go back one level here, we have a PHP folder, and down here we have a PHP application. So you need to pass the directory to that file in this JSON file. All right, these are the things that I covered in my first video, and I recommend watching that one first. All right, so let's create our index.php in our folder, and I'm just going to open the PHP tags, and let's talk about superglobals. So if you go to the documentation, you can see we have these superglobals, and superglobals are built-in variables that are always available in all scopes. So we're going to go through them and see what they are, and also use some of these like post and files inside our little project. And of course, we are going to use databases. So make sure you start your Apache server and MySQL from XAMPP control panel if you haven't. So I'm going to start them. So we can go to localhost now, and this takes us to the dashboard. We need to go to the folder that we created, PHP part 2 for me, and this is giving us an empty page. So I'm just going to put this side by side with VS Code. All right, so I'm going to close this one to keep things cleaner. And going back to PHP documentation, I'm going to copy these and paste it here so we don't have to go back and forth. So I'm going to make comment section and paste those. So let's just start with globals. So I'm going to use print R and just print these superglobals one by one, and start with globals. It will give us an array. By default, it has the get superglobal, the post, the cookie, and the files, and they are all empty. So in the previous video, we mentioned that globals, superglobal, gives us access to all the global variables. So if I was to create a variable here, call it x, and set it to 10, this is of course a global variable, and you can see it's added to that array. So x is 10. However, if this was inside of a function, so let's call it add, and it's not going to do anything, but it's inside the block of this function now, right? So if I format the code, it looks like this, and it's going to go away because it's not global anymore. So that's global. Next, we have env, short for environment, gives us access to all the environment variables. We don't have any environment at this time, but if manually I was to just set, for example, username and set it to John123 and then refresh this site, you can see we get username in our environment variables. Let's go to server. I kind of skipped this one, but let's move this around. So let's go to server, and server gives us a bunch of information about our server. So let's print this, and it's kind of difficult to see what's going on here because of the styling, and we could wrap this inside a pre-tag, but I just want to show you that it just gives us a bunch of information about the server. For example, our host, which is localhost, and then down here we have the server software, we have our PHP version, we have our request method, and of course we have PHP self. So this is an important one. When we use forms, we will use this PHP self. If you want to get the user machine and the browser, you can use this user agent. But again, there are other ways and easier ways. So server gives us information about the server. Now we have get, post, and files. These are also arrays that gives us information about the form that was submitted through the get method or post method or files that were uploaded. Let's close the PHP tag here and create a form and set the action empty because by default it's going to be submitted to this page. And the method, it's going to be get. By default, it is get. I'm just going to add it here so we know we are working with get method. And inside the get method, I'm just going to create an input text, call it search. And of course, let's just have a btn that says submit. Okay, so I'm going to print R, the get Superglobal. So let's refresh. We get nothing. We have our form down here, right? So let's add something, for example, PHP, and press enter or submit. You can see it's added to the URL. And also the get superglobal is telling us this is our query. So we have a search key where the value is PHP. So we use the get method most of the time for search queries because it's rather unsecure, because you can see the information is being added to the URL. So this is really useful when you want to make a search field, because you want to give the ability to the user to bookmark this page with the search query. So of course, similar to get, we have post, which gives us the information about a form that was submitted through the post method. So if I change this to post and everything else is the same, refresh this site and let's just say post request, for example, and submit. You can see again, search is the name that we gave to our input field and the value is whatever we put inside this input field. But if I delete this one, this is from the last get method, right? You can see nothing has been added to the URL. So if I search something else, you can see nothing has been added up there. So this is much more secure, and we always use post unless we want the user input to be public. Now for files is also similar, and it just gives us information about the files that has been uploaded to the site. So we're going to use an input type file, and let's call it upload, and we don't need the ID, of course, and refresh the site. Let's actually just press enter on the URL because we don't want to resubmit the form. Let's choose a file here, and I'm just going to use this earth, for example. It's an image, and submit. So I forgot to add enc type to our form. Because we are working with files now, we should add the enc type and set the value to multi-part form data. Now this should work. Let's resubmit it and choose earth again. Submit, and you can see we have the upload key, which is the name of our file input, and then we have an array where in that array we have name of that file, we have the type, which was an image, a temp name, and the size. So in this video we will actually go through how to upload files into our project, but for now this is the files superglobal. Let's talk about request. By default, request contains the information in get, post, and cookies superglobal. So if I refresh this page, we get nothing. But if we add something here, and the method is post down here, and add an image as well, you can see if I submit, we only get the post. We don't get anything about the file. Now, if I change this to get and save and refresh the site and add something here, choose a file and submit, you can see we have the search key and the value, and then we have the upload key and the value, which is kind of being treated as a text. So we have access to get, post, and cookies through the request superglobal. All right, let's talk about cookies and sessions. And cookies are basically variables that are stored in the client. So sometimes we want to store something on the client, like the theme of the website that the user chooses, and we want to keep it on their browser. So next time they visit, they don't have to, manually change it again. So if I save this one and refresh this site, we get an empty array, of course. We don't need this form anymore. So I'm just going to delete it. And we can create cookies by using the setCookies function. Now this setCookie function takes the name, for example, theme, and the value. Let's set it to light, and then the expiration time. So we can use the time function and add 86,400. That is a day in seconds. So this will be expired in a day. And then we can end our statement. So if I save this one and refresh the site, you can see we have theme as light. And if we inspect the site and go to applications, and inside the cookies, we have theme, which is set to light. To unset or delete a cookie, we can use the set cookie again and give it the same name, delete the value because we want to unset it, and set the time to something in the past. So I'm just going to have a greater number than this. And if I save this one and refresh the site, it's gone. So it's being set at once and then unset. Now, similar to cookies, we also have the session. But unlike the cookie, sessions are stored on the server. So they are much more secure, and it is mainly used for, keeping the user logged in, for example. Now, if I refresh the site just like this, we will get a warning that says undefined global variable session, because if we want to work with sessions, we need to start our session. So right on the top of our script, we can say session start. So the session must be started before we are going to work with it. So if I refresh the site now, we get an empty array because now it is started, but it's empty. So we are creating a session basically. To add to a session, we can grab the super global, and then just like adding to an array, we can give it a key, let's say username, and set it to a value that we want. And I'm going to delete these cookies. So if I refresh the site now, we get username equals to John123. To unset a session or delete a session variable, we can use session unset. So this will unset all the session variables. And if I refresh again, it's gone because we are setting it a variable and then we are unsetting it. To destroy a session, we can use session destroy. We're not going to see any output, of course, but we are starting it. We are setting some variable to the session and then we are unsetting it and then we are destroying it. And that's all about the super globals. Now we are going to create our little project, which is kind of a blog project where we can post blog posts to the database and read from it and show it to the user. So I'm going to delete everything here and I'm going to paste some markup code. All right, so I just pasted this code and this will be available on the GitHub repo, and it is going to be called markup.html because there's only HTML in it. But we bring it inside our index.php. So if I refresh this one, this is what we get. By the way, I am using Tailwind CSS for my classes and the script is already added here. Let's quickly go through this. Of course, they have the head element. We have our navigation with 2 links that are right now, they are not going anywhere. And then we have our main tag, which includes 2 sections. One for creating the post, this form right here, and one section for showing. For now, we have a boilerplate of a post. All right, so this is the markup we want to work with. And because we are going to have 2 pages, we want to have sort of a dynamic layout. So we want to have our navigation available on every page, and then the rest should go under the navigation, of course. Just like any front-end framework where we have slots and we work with templates or components, we want to do a similar job here. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a layouts folder and create 2 files here. One is going to be header.php. The other one is going to be footer.php. So we want to see how we can include or add these files to one another. So let's grab everything above this comment and cut it and paste it inside the header. Save this one. Let's go back to the index and grab every closing tag except this section. So these 3 closing tags, cut it and paste it inside the footer. Now, if I save the index and refresh, all the styles are gone and we only have the bare bone of our markup. So inside the root directory, let's create another file here and let's call it post_create or new post or whatever name you prefer. And let's cut this section with the comment and add it here. So now we have 2 pages, right? Post, create, and index. And then we have our header and footer, 2 layouts. For now, we don't need to do anything in these 2 files. So I'm just going to close header and footer. We need to include those files inside the index.html and post create. Right on the top of index, we can open our PHP tags, and to include a file inside another file, we can use the keyword include. So there are a few ways and we are going to go through them one by one. We can use the include keyword and then pass the directory or the path to that layout or the file we want to use. In this case, we want to use header.php. So let's copy this whole statement and paste it down here, change this one to footer.php and refresh. There we go. We get the header and the footer and the styles are back. So we have include and then we have include once. And the difference is that if I have 2 include statements here and they are both pointing to the same file, I will get 2 navigation. You can see, and it kind of looks funny. But if I change one of them to include once, you can see it goes away because this one checks if this file has been included once, then it's not going to do it again. So this one makes sure that the included file is only available one time. We don't want to do it multiple times. So I'm going to delete this one. There is also require. So require works similar to include, but if the file doesn't exist, like change the name here, so headers doesn't exist, right? And if I save it, it's going to break our code. Require breaks the code if the file doesn't exist. However, if we use the include keyword again and refresh the site, it doesn't break the code. It just gives us a warning. Similar to include and include once, we also have require and require once. So it works the same way as include and include once. It checks if it's already included, it's not going to do it again. So because of this once keyword. So if a file is a requirement for the rest of your project, you can use the require keyword. But if you don't want to break your code, if you don't want to break your application just because a layout doesn't exist, you can use the include keyword. All right, so we're just going to copy and paste this inside the post create as well. So up here and down here, and let's make some spaces, change this one to footer. So our pages work, but these navigation links don't go anywhere. So let's go to the header, and we have these two A elements inside the href. For home, we want to go to index.php, and for new post, we want to go post underscore create.php. So refresh home, new post, and of course it works. That's how we can include PHP files inside one another. And now we are going to set up our database so we can read from it and write to it. So let's go to the browser and open a new tab, go to localhost. This will take us to the XAMPP dashboard, and we want to go to the PHP My Admin. So this is our MySQL interface, or PHP My Admin, and we have some default databases and some of the databases that I created for my own practice. So the first step is to create a database. Let's go to the databases tab up here, and let's give it a name. I'm just going to say db underscore part 2 and click this create button. This will create our database. Now, we don't have any table just now. We want to create a posts table so we can actually save our posts inside this table. And this will ask how many columns this table should have. We can choose 4 or more or less, but for our project, I want to have an ID, so that's 1, the title and the body, that's 3, and then the created at date, so that's 4 columns. So I'm just going to press create here, and now we have to give those columns a name. So ID, title, body, and created at. All right, for the type of our ID, we are going to leave it as int, and we have so many other types, but the main ones are integer, which is just a whole number, varchar, which is a text, so it's the string between 0 to 65,535 characters. So we're going to choose this one for the title. For the text, which is a longer string, a much longer, we're going to use this for the body. And for the date, we're going to use this, or a more specific one, a date time, for our created at. So first, ID is going to be int, and we want to set the index to primary, and we can just press go here. A primary key makes sure that it's not being repeated and it is unique. So we want to make sure our ID is unique and it's not being repeated. And we want to check this AI, which is auto increment. We want to auto increment this one. We don't want to manually add the ID. The rest is going to be empty. For the title, like I said, we're going to use varchar, and the maximum length is going to be 255. This is just a convention, but you can add any number that you want, like 100, 150, or whatever is your preference. We don't have any default, and the rest is going to be empty. None of these fields should be null. So if I check this null column here, that means I'm allowing it to be null or empty, but I don't want to allow that. I want all of these to have a value. For the body, we're going to use text, and everything else is going to be the same. For the created at, we're going to use date time. So under the date time category, we choose this one. And for the default, we want to use the current timestamp. So we don't want to add date manually, of course. We just want to grab the date and the time of that day and time. So that's it. That's about our columns and the types. Let's save it. And here is our structure, the structure of our table. Let's add a row or data to this table. We can go to the insert tab up here, leave the ID empty because, again, remember that's being auto incremented or automatically added. So we want to say first post, and this is the body of the post. And the date, again, it's going to be automatically filled in. So let's press go. This gives us the information that one row was added, but also gives us the MySQL query. And we will use this when we want to post to the database using our PHP script. Now, if we go back to the posts table here, we have our ID 1, first post, this is the body, and the date and the time that it was created. Now, in order to access our database from PHP, we also need the information about the user. So if we go back to the home page on PHP My Admin, we have these user accounts. By default, you should have this root on localhost that has all the privileges. You can create your own user, or you can just use this one to access the databases. But I'm just going to create another user specifically for this video. So let's click on this add user account. And for the username, I'm going to use user underscore part 2. For the host, we're going to use localhost because we are running on localhost. For the password, I'm just going to say 321321, something simple. 321321. And also down here, we want to make sure that give all the privileges to the user. You can select the ones that you don't want to, but normally we give all the privileges because we are the admin of this page. So let's press go, and the user was created with this query or this command. And if we go back to the user accounts up here, we can see user underscore part2 has been created, and it has a password and it has all the privileges. So let's go back to our project and let's create a folder here, call it config. So this is going to be our configuration files, and inside that config folder I'm going to create a file, call it db config. So let's open our PHP tag and let's close all these other files for now. We don't need it. And to connect to a database using PHP, there are two main ways. One is MySQLi and the other one is PDO. Now in this video, I'm going to use MySQLi, and in the next video where we learn about object-oriented programming, I will use PDO. With MySQLi also, we have two ways. One is the procedural way, which is the way that we've been learning and using PHP, and one is the object-oriented way. So I'm going to show you both ways in this video, even though we haven't talked about object-oriented programming, but it's going to be quite simple. So I just want to show you and make sure that we get through the MySQLi in this video. So in order to connect to a database, we need some information, and for that I'm going to define some constants here. So first we need the DB host, and this is going to be localhost, and I'm going to repeat this one. Then we need the DB user or username, DB password or database password, and then the database name, of course, so DB name. Now for the user, I called it user underscore part2. You can use root or whichever user name you used. And then for the password, I used 321321, and the database name, I think I called it db underscore part2. Okay, so db underscore part2. So those are all the information that we need to connect to a database. So like I said, there are two ways. So I'm going to make comments here. One is the procedural way and one is the object-oriented way. So we can create a connection variable up here and set it to mysqli underscore connect. This would take, you can see here, this takes the host name, the name, username, and the password and the database name. So we're just going to pass these variables or constants that we have up here. Now, normally, these would go to our environment file, but we don't have any environment, so I'm just going to add it here. So the first one is db host, and then db username or db user, and then db pass for password, and then db name. So let's end this statement, and let's create an if statement because we want to make sure if this was successful. So in the if statement, we just want to negate the connection and say if this connection was not successful, then do something. So let's say echo error. All right, so let's echo error if this was not successful. Let's refresh this site, or let's go to the home page. I'm sorry, one thing I forgot, we actually have to include this file inside our header because we're not actually using it anywhere. Let's go to the header. We want to add it here because this header is available on every page. So let's open our PHP tags and close it. And inside the PHP tag, I'm going to include config folder dbconfig file. So let's close it. Let's first have it as the correct way. So let's refresh. We are not getting any error, but if I add an S to the password and refresh, we get a fatal error. So you can see here, it says fatal error uncaught. So in every programming languages, we need to catch all the errors. Falling into an uncaught error and breaking the application, it's a very bad practice. And in order to catch errors, in PHP, like many other languages, we can use a try-catch block. So a try-catch block tries to do something, as the name suggests, and if it is successful, then it will move on, but if it is not successful, it will catch the error and shows us what was that error. So we want to try to connect. So let me move that comment down here too. And we want to catch an exception. You can see here that this gave us an exception. So we want to catch an exception. So we can use the exception class and give it a name, let's say E, and then down here, let's just echo that E. Now, this is the first time we are using a class, so this is an instance of a class. Again, we haven't talked about the object-oriented programming way, but just for now, note this exception is a class. So let's do this and refresh. Now, you can see the application is not breaking, but we are still getting the error, and it says access denied. So in order to get the message, instead of all this nonsense, we can just chain a method that is available on the instant of this exception class. So get message, which is a method, And if we refresh it, we just get a readable message. So don't worry about the classes and this syntax. We will talk about it in the next video. But for this video, I just want to tell you this is a class. This is an instant of a class, which is an object. And to access the properties or the methods within the class, we use this arrow syntax. Anyway, that's what we want. So let's put this back to the correct way and refresh. We are connecting. Great. So this is the procedural way to use the object-oriented way. I'm just going to add it down here, but I will comment it out because we're not going to repeat it twice. But instead of using the MySQLi connect, we can use a new MySQLi instant. So again, this is a class and we are instantiating it using the new keyword, and then it takes the same arguments and the rest is the same, but this is the difference. Right now we are using the MySQL class, but here we are just using the connection function. So I'm going to comment this out. I will keep these as a reference. So when you get these files from the GitHub, you have access to these. But in this video, we will continue with the procedural way. However, I will show you the object-oriented way as well. All right, let's close this one. We don't need this anymore. And let's go to index. In here, we want to actually read from the database and populate our homepage with the data that we are getting from the database. Let's go to the database for a second. So to the posts database. And let's add another post here. Let's go to insert. I just want to have 2 posts. And let's say second post, and I'm just going to say this is the second post and click go. And now we have 2 posts. All right, so right after this include statement, I'm just going to add some lines and we are going to read from the database. To read from a database, we need a MySQL query. And if we go back to the post table here, you can see the query is actually up here. It gives us the query that we need to run. So we just have to say select a star, which means all, from the posts table. So let's create our query and save it inside the variable. And it's going to be text. So select a star from posts. So these keywords don't need to be capital, but this is just a convention. So MySQL keywords are capital letters. Now we have access to this connection and we want to use it to read the data. So we can use MySQLi underscore query, which takes the connection, we called it con, and then the query that we want to run. So we want to run this query on this connection, and we use the MySQL query function. And this gives us a result, right? So we want to save it inside our posts variable, and let's var dump these posts. So see what we get, and end the statement and refresh. So this is giving us an object. So you can see we have some properties on this object, like current field count, which is the columns count is 4, the number of rows is 2, so we have 2 rows of data, and the type. So this is a good property to check that if we actually have any rows in our database, then do something with it. Otherwise, don't show it because we don't have any data. So up here, we can actually say if MySQLi num rows. So there's another function on MySQLi, and that's num rows that will take the result of a query. In this case, it's our post, and then do this. So we want to actually say if there is any result, there is any data, then var dump the posts. So of course we will get the same thing, but if I negate it, for example, there is no data by adding this exclamation mark and I save it, we get nothing. All right, so of course we want to add this down here because we want to repeat this block of code for every post. Now, before I do that, I just want to show you the object-oriented way to get the result. So this is again the procedural way, and let's say OOP. So the object-oriented way is kind of the same. We grab the connection that we created down here. So we saved it inside this connection variable, and we can chain the query method. So there is a query method available on that instant. And then this will take the query statement, which is up here. So if I end this statement and comment this out, right, even though we are using this function here, and down here I'm calling a property on connection, it should still work the same way. So if I refresh the site and take away this exclamation and refresh, we would still get the same thing. And again, we have the number of rows property, so we can check connection arrow number of rows, and then if it's 0, then don't do anything. Anyway, this is the object-oriented way, but like I said, we're going to use procedural way. All right, so down here we want to repeat this code. So we can use an if statement. So let's open a PHP tag and then close it and say if number of rows in posts variable was true. So it gave us something. We want to repeat this block of code. Now we could of course move this block of code up here and echo it as a text, but then it will take away the code formatting. It becomes very ugly. So a shortcut or a shorthand for if statements or other statements in PHP is to use a column and saying this is not finished. Basically, I'm saying this is my if statement and the condition, but I'm not done with this if statement. And whatever goes after this, it's going to be conditional based on this. To end an if statement, we can open and close the PHP tags, and inside this tag we can say end if. So now this is our if statement. Great. So if I refresh it, we get the same thing. Let's get rid of this if statement and we get our post, but if I negate it, which means there are no posts, we get nothing. Now we want to check if there is any post, then loop over it and show this block of code for each post. So we want to repeat this and add another statement here. So we want to use the for each, which we talked about it in the previous video, and we want to loop over the posts, which is an object. We can do that and say grab every post. So for each post in posts, then do something. Again, we don't want these curly brackets. We want the colon, which means we are not done with the for each. We want to do this block of code and then end it here. So instead of end if, we can say end for each. And you can see now I can format the code and it looks really nice. All right, so let's refresh this one. We get 2 blocks of code, even though they are the same because they are hard coded, but we get 2. That means we have 2 rows of data. So let's change these to dynamic data. We have access to the post. We can simply open the PHP tag and close it and just echo post title. Great. So you can see we get the post title. However, this is not safe. In the previous video, we talked about HTML special characters briefly, but here we can wrap this with this function, HTML special characters. This would make sure that if this post title contains any harmful script, then it would not be translated as a script, but it would be as a special character, basically a text, and it's not harmful. Let's do the same thing. So I'm going to copy this PHP tag and let's press enter and let's add lines here. So we get our PHP tag in the new line. All right, so we want to say posted on the post created at, and then for the body, we're going to do the same thing, body. All right, so let's refresh, and of course we get first post posted on this date, and this is the content. I just want to add one more thing here. Right now in this if statement, we are using the procedural way, so I'm going to add object-oriented way down here. Instead of this MySQL numRows function, we can grab the connection and then chain that numRows. So remember that object had a property number of rows, and then we want to check if this is greater than 0, then do something. So maybe I'll just add it up here as a comment so you can have it as a reference. So if this returns true, then we want to do this block of code. The rest is the same. This for each is the same, but only how we can check. And really doesn't matter which one you use because both ways would work the same. And one last touch on our index page or home page. You can see the first post goes on top and then the second post. So they are sorted from the newest to the oldest. We want actually the latest or the oldest go on top. We can add filters to our MySQL query. So we can order it. So order by a specific column, and we want to order it by the column that is called created at. And this by default has the ascending attribute to it, which means from top to bottom, but we want to actually make it descending. So from bottom to top. So if I refresh it, the newest post goes on top. All right. So that's about our home page. Now we want to create posts. So let's close this one and dbconfig and go to post create and also go to the page post create. And in this page we have, of course, our h1, just the title, and then we have a form. The action is empty, the method is empty. We have an input where the name is title, and then a text area where the name is body, and an input of type submit with the name submit, which is actually acts like a button. And we are using an input submit for a button because I want to check if this is submitted at all, then check the fields. So let's do that now. Before we post anything to the database, let's grab the data out of these input fields. So let's create 2 variables, title, set it to an empty string, and then body. So there's a shortcut for this in PHP because we are using empty string for both these variables. We can just grab this one and add it up here and say title equals to body equals to empty string. Basically means these two variables both should have an empty string as their value. I want to copy paste this one and then add error next to these names because we want to show an error to the user if these fields are empty. And when it comes to validating the form fields, make sure you are always doing it on the server side. Anyway, I'm just going to print out the post superglobal and make sure you give the post method to the method of the form. And for the action, for now we leave it empty. We will come back to it. So if I refresh this site and add post, you can see we get the title, which is empty, body is empty, and the submit is add post. Now that's the value, but we have a key submit. So we want to check if the post superglobal has this key, then do something. So here we want to check if this is set, right? This submit is set. So there is a function for it in PHP. We can say is set and then pass the post superglobal and submit. So if this is set, then do something. And what do we want to do? We want to check if these are not empty, these input fields. So again, another if statement, and there is another function that is called empty, and it checks if a value is empty or not, a variable. So this time we want to check for post title. So the title key in the post superglobal, if it is empty, then set the error, so the title error, to title cannot be empty, or any message that we want to show. Else, so if it is not empty, then save it inside the title. So we want to say the title equals to this, but there's a but here. Again, when it comes to PHP or any server-side language, always think security. We cannot just save the raw input inside our variable and then send it to database. We need to sanitize this. So there are two ways. One, we can use the same HTML as special characters, and this would make sure if there is any characters or if there is any harmful data, it will turn to a string. There is also, I'm going to comment this out, there is also filter input method, which is in a sense more elegant, if you will. And I'm going to cut this for a second and show you what it takes. So filter input takes the type. What do we want to filter? We want to do the input post. If it was a get method, we would say input get. So let's say input post. This is not a string, by the way. And then the string, the variable name, which is our post title, and then the filter we want to use. So let's go. I'm going to copy this name, go to PHP documentation, and just search for that one. And down here, we have types of filter, right? We have validate filters, sanitize filters, and so on. So if you go to sanitize filters and grab this one, sanitize full special characters. And you can see it says the same as it is the same as HTML special characters. So if I use this one and add it here, again, not as a string, we get the same thing. This is really your preference, which one you want to use. I'm going to keep this one and leave this comment up here as a reference. We want to show this error if this field is empty, because if right now if I submit it, there is no error even though this is empty. Of course, on the front end, you could add the required keyword, and this would require the user to add something before they submit it. Now this is not secure at all because they can just inspect the site and go to the elements and go to the body and grab that form input and just simply delete this require, and now I can submit it. So it's not secure at all. And we want to check it on the server side. Now if this is empty, we want to show a message. So down here, I want to create a small HTML tag and then open the PHP tags and then close it and then echo the title error. Let's give it a refresh again, add post, and you can see because it's empty, it's giving us an error. So title cannot be empty. So let's actually give it a class of red text, red 500. So it's red now. All right, so we want to do the same thing for the body. And down here, we want to say if the post superglobal body is empty, then say content cannot be empty or post content cannot be empty. And then down here, we want to change this title to body. So like that. And this is also should be body error, sorry. And also here, just to make sure everything is in the right order. So again, let's refresh the page and leave the fields empty. We get the error. Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot to add this down here. And we want to change this to body error. That's it. And let's resubmit the form. We get the errors. This is validating the form. So we are validating the form, and now we want to actually submit to the database. So submit or add to the database. And again, we want to check, we want to be sure that the data we are submitting is not empty values, because we are not accepting any empty values in our database. So in the if statement here, I want to check if these two are not empty. We can use the empty function again and pass the title, parentheses, don't forget the parentheses, and we want to negate it. So we want to say if the title is not empty, and so a logical operator, we are going to repeat this one and say if the body also not empty, then do something. So here we want to create our query and then add it to the database. So to insert data into a database using MySQL, we have this statement. So we can say insert into the table name, posts, and then the columns we want to insert into. So we don't need to grab ID or create it at because they are automatically being filled in. We want the title and the body. This doesn't have to be a string. And then the values for these. So the values for the title and the body is, of course, the title and the body. Now, for these ones, we need to add the single quotes and pass the title and then the body. And we can just pass the variables as they are, and they are dynamic because the outer quotation is double quotation and the inner ones are single quotations. So this is our MySQL query. Now we need to, again, use the connection to add it to the database. So again, there is a procedural way and the object-oriented way. So in the procedural way, we can use the MySQL query. So this would take the connection, just like what we did in the index, and then the query. And the object-oriented way is going to take the connection and chain the query function to it, and this takes the query statement and does the same thing. So now we want to say if this is true, do something. If it's not, then show us an error. So let me comment this out for now because we don't want two statements. And I'm going to wrap this inside an if statement. I want to say if this didn't give me any error, and then redirect the user back to the home page. And we can use the header function. This would take the location of where we want to send the user to. So we want to send it to index.php. So location colon index.php. And if there was an error, just say, for example, error. So object-oriented way is going to be the same. You just have to change the condition with this one. Let's try this out and we want to see if it works. I think everything is in order. So let's see if this works correctly. So I'm just going to refresh the page, add third post, and say this is the third post. So let's click add post. So we are not redirected back to index.php. All right, so I made a mistake here, guys. I'm sorry. When we use the filter input, we don't have to use the superglobal and pass the key here. We actually just have to pass the name of our input, which is the body in this case, and then the title. So the name of our input here, this should work. By the way, we are still not using the action, but it works because it is submitting to the same page by default. Let's give it a refresh and say third post and just add something here, add, and now we are back to the home page and the post is actually added to the database. So if we go to the database and click on post, we have third post. The ID is 4 because I created one and then I deleted it. And because it's a primary key, it will not repeat the IDs. And you can see I had to come here and check the documentation myself because I keep forgetting these methods and functions. Anyway, back to our project. Make sure if you are using the filter input, the first one is your input method, which is post for us, or method on the form, and then the name of the input, and then the filters, of course. Anyway, let's talk about this action. And of course, we can just leave it empty, but again, this would open doors to potential attacks. So the convention is to open the PHP tags here, open and close them, and grab the name of this file using the server superglobal. Remember, when you use the superglobals and we looked at server, we had php underscore self, which is the name of this file. So if I echo it up here, just to show you, and let's just refresh the page, you can see it says php part 2 post create.php. Now, this is basically the same thing as leaving it empty. What we want to do, wrap this one with HTML as special characters, because potentially attackers can come up here and add a slash and start typing the script. But with this method, even if they do that, it will be translated to a special HTML characters, and therefore there's not going to be any harmful data. Anyway, that's about our create form. So if I just add another post just to make sure everything works. So we want to say fourth post and some text and press add. Great, it's working and it's being ordered from the latest to the oldest. All right, the last topic that I want to cover in this video is file upload. Let's close these files and create another file here. And I'm just going to call it file underscore upload upload.php. Let's open the PHP tags and let's go to the header and add another anchor tag here. And let's set the href to file underscore upload. And then the text is going to be file upload. All right, let's give it a refresh. It looks funny, but it's fine. File upload. And it's an empty page for now. Let's maybe grab everything from index or one of these files, doesn't matter. We're just going to grab everything, add it here, and delete the content. So I'm just going to keep the section, and sorry about that. Need the closing tag for PHP. I think we should be good. Yeah, we get our nav and create a form again, and the action, we can get it from post create. So this is going to be the same thing. So PHP self. So this is the action, the same file. The method is going to be post, of course. And because we are working with files now, we need to add enc type and the value multipart form data. Inside the form, I'm going to create an input of type file. Let's call it upload, and we don't need the ID. And again, an input of type submit that is going to say upload, and the name is going to be submit again, just like what we did in the form create. Okay, refresh, that's what we get. So up here, I'm just going to print the files super global, and in our form, I'm just going to grab this earth and upload. There we go. Maybe I'm just going to add some styles to this button because it looks really ugly. All right, so this is our button and it looks much nicer. And you can see we have the information about the uploaded file. So to actually upload the file, we need to grab some information out of this file superglobal. So I'm just going to create some variables here, file a name, and set it to superglobal files. And we need to go to the upload key first. That is the name of our file input, and then that is an array itself. So the upload is an array and we want to grab the name. All right, I'm going to copy paste this a couple of times. Then we need the file size. So it's going to be the same array, but the size property. Then we need the temp name. So the temp name is going to be this temp name, and then the extension. Now, this doesn't give us an extension, but we can use some PHP methods to actually get the extension. And for that, I'm going to use path info. So this path info asks for the path, it says up here, but I can just pass the file name and then the flag. So these are the available flags. I want to get the extension. So path info underscore extension. All right, so just to make sure we are getting the right file extension, and let's resubmit the form, we get PNG, of course. Now I want to have an array of valid extension. So I want to say PNG is allowed, for example, JPG and WebP. So these extensions are allowed, and if uploaded file is not any of these extensions, then I'm not going to allow it to be uploaded. So all of this, of course, it's going to be after the form submit. So like what we did in the form create, we want to say if is set function, and we want to grab the post super global and check for submit. That's what we called our button. So if this is set, then do all of this, and then we want to save it inside our project folders. So I'm going to make a comment. We want to validate it and then upload it. So let's add an if statement here and say if the file size is smaller than 5 megabyte, so it's 5 million bytes. So one more zero. So if it is smaller than 5 megabyte and the file extension is in this array, so we have the function in array that checks if this file extension, in this case it's called our needle, is inside the haystack, which is our valid extensions array. So if this is true and this is true, then we want to save it inside our project. So we have a function, and that is move uploaded file. So this would take the file temp name, and where do we want to save it? So I can create a uploads folder in the root directory and then pass the file name. And I need to change this to double quotes. Sorry, single quotes would not work because I'm using dynamic data. So like this. All right, so let's end this statement. And then if there was an error, just say error. Probably a better way would be have two different if statements where if the file size was bigger than 5, then say the file cannot be bigger than 5 megabyte. And if it wasn't the right extension, then you show the right errors. But for now, I'm just going to show error if it doesn't work. All right, for this to work, we actually have to create the upload folders ourselves. So we create the uploads folder in the root directory and then leave the rest as it is. So let's just see how this works. I don't need this print R anymore. All right, so let's choose a file, and I'm going to choose this earth, which is 6 megabyte. So it's going to give us an error. Upload says error. So, and there's nothing in our upload folder. Now let's choose this PHP thumbnail for my video, that is actually this video. And if I upload it, we get an error, of course, because I made a mistake. This file name is different. Sorry, let's do it again. So let's do this, and the file is not uploaded. I'm going to choose that YouTube thumbnail file and upload, and we don't get any success message, but if we check our upload folder, there it is. Great. So this is how you can handle upload in a simple way and save it into your project. And that's about it, guys. These are all the topics that I want to cover for this video. In the next video, we will talk about object-oriented programming in PHP. So I hope this video has been helpful and you enjoyed it. I want to thank you all for your likes, shares, views, and support. I'll see you at the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.